Good afternoon and welcome to Working for You. Thank you very much for joining us for our program today. As usual, your company is appreciated from week to week. We are still in the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season, and we have to make sure that we prepare as best as we could for the eventuality of any impact from, it could be a storm, it could be a hurricane. We have to be prepared. We know that disasters, hurricanes being one of them, can be very deadly. As we have seen in just recent times, a few days ago, the impact of Hurricane Ida on the Louisiana and Mississippi and states in the United States in that area, and the damage that Ida caused. And we have to be ever mindful that we are living in a part of the world where every year we have a hurricane season, and there's always the possibility that we can be impacted, and we have to prepare. Just recently as well, we prepared for what was Tropical Storm Grace, and we saw how the machinery came together in terms of the preparation. There were about 81 persons coming together just to prepare for the passage of Tropical Storm Grace. Luckily, we were not impacted significantly, but we saw so many people coming together, the telecommunications companies. We saw the 10 subcommittees on the National Disaster Management Committee. We saw NGOs and so on. And that gives you an idea how important it is that we have to prepare with all stakeholders being on board, because hurricane preparedness, disaster preparedness is an all-of-society approach. Today I have with me Mr. Kervin Lloyd, who is a member of the National Disaster Management Committee in the St. Kitts and Nevis National Disaster Plan. And today he's here representing the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee. Mr. Lloyd, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'm extremely proud and honored to be here to share in what we do with respect to helping to keep this country safe before, during, and perhaps post-disaster.
Right. I have also with me Dr. Eric Brown, and Dr. Brown is representing the Environment Subcommittee. Dr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the chair and members of the subcommittee, Environment Subcommittee, thank you very much for having us.
Right. The National Disaster Committee for the National Disaster Management Committee of St. Kitts and Nevis comprises of chairpersons of the National Disaster Plan subcommittees, governmental, non-governmental, and voluntary organizations, agencies, interest groups, donors, religious bodies, and individuals, all of which must be coordinated to function as one organization in times of crisis and disorder. And we know that when we have these times of crisis and disorder, all these subcommittees voluntary organization and agencies, they come together in what is called the National Emergency Operations Center that is activated, and they all come together as one and function as one to deal with disasters. Now, Mr. Lloyd, you are on the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee. What is the significance of such a committee?
Well, to put it frankly, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the actual chair of the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee. I serve as her alternate on that committee, but we are very much involved as to what the committee does, the subcommittee does. We are very much involved in making sure that St. Kitts and Nevis maintains its contacts regionally and internationally with respect to the threat of a disaster, making sure that if needs be, we are in a position to seek the appropriate response and the appropriate help from the region, from our international allies, to make sure that we, as quickly as possible, can return St. Kitts and Nevis to a state of normalcy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And Dr. Brown, the Environment Subcommittee. What is the significance of that subcommittee?
Well, as the title suggests, we are responsible for the issues with respect to impacts on the environment. We have to do with the pre-assessment, that is doing assessments before a disaster such as a hurricane would strike, to see the level of readiness and to see what needs to be done in order for us to be as prepared as possible to face the effects of a disaster of any type. We also involved with the post. So in the event that we are affected by any kind of a disaster, we also go in immediately after and do the assessment so that the issues arising can be addressed as quickly and effectively as possible. We work along with the other agencies as well, other committees also, to ensure that there is efficient collaboration so that we can get back, as colleague Mr. Lloyd says, back to a level of normalcy.
Right, and so we see that how important these subcommittees are, not just before disaster, but during, as you correctly said, and post-disaster. Now, Mr. Lloyd, in the event that we have a disaster that significantly impacts us as a federation, as a people, what is the process if we need humanitarian aid? What is the process for seeking such aid?
Well, first, to be honest, we depend in the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee very, very heavily on the persons who are tasked with doing an initial assessment of damage and so on, immediately after the disaster or immediately after the event has passed. We keep in close contact. We have been keeping in close contact with our regional and international partners with respect to assistance so that we can easily call on them for assistance as soon as we are impacted. As soon as we are impacted. We have been over the years and in more recent times very, very frequently been making sure that all our contacts are in place. We know sometimes people move, people get promoted, people retire, people are transferred, and so we want to make sure that the names and contacts that we have in place in these assisting agencies, they are in fact the people who we can readily call on if we have an emergency, if we have a disaster. We procedurally, as soon as we get through the coordinating agency, which is NEMA, as soon as we get a report as to the initial damage, initial assessment of damage after a disaster, we immediately mobilize to contact the agencies who work with us, regionally and internationally, to give them a sense of what our immediate needs are. The long-term needs are going to come after, but what our immediate needs are to preserve life and to some extent property just after the disaster.
Right, so of course you're talking here not just in terms of material assistance, but also logistical assistance.
Of course, absolutely, because after disaster, most persons are shaken up, and don't ever fool yourself into thinking that the persons who are assisting, the persons who are coordinating, the persons who are leading, even persons at NEMA, after a disaster, they too are not shaken. So they have a very special role to play. First of all, they're leaving families at home to sacrifice and come out to make sure that the rest of the country returns to a state of normalcy. They too may have been impacted personally, psychologically, and so on, but they have to keep their wits about them so that they can perform the role to which they have committed through NEMA in returning this country to normalcy. We are on the phone. We are using our, immediately post-disaster, we would use all our resources, communicating resources, to enact or effect whatever assistance can be had regionally and internationally. One of the reasons why we say we heavily depend on the persons doing the initial assessment is because if that initial assessment does not come in within a timely manner, a lot of things are thrown out of whack. Usually, in this part of the world, if we are impacted by a disaster, we are usually not alone. And so, when we reach out to others for assistance, there are usually other entities, other countries, other territories that are reaching out maybe to the same persons for assistance. And so, there's a saying, the early bird gets the worms. It's not that we so much want to be ahead of everybody else, because a disaster is a disaster. It's not so much that we want to be ahead of everybody else in seeking assistance, but the later we stay, the longer we stay to submit certain critical pieces of information, is the less likely that we are to be at the forefront when these agencies step forward to assist us.
Now, Mr. Lloyd, your embassies, St. Kitts and Nevis embassies abroad, how critical are they when a disaster impacts us in terms of the foreign affairs and its relationship with these embassies and consulates that are abroad?
Well, to be honest, more and more persons within the diaspora, Canada, the United States, Europe, and all around the world, we are encouraging our missions and our heads of missions, the staff at our missions, to keep a very, very close relationship with them. Not only find out where they live, how to contact them, in the case of if they have problems, but also to make sure that we know how to find them, because some of these people are very, very willing and ready to move at a moment's notice if anything happens in their home, St. Kitts and Nevis. Very, very willing to assist, very willing to mobilize all the resources that they have, very willing to mobilize all the resources that they know of outside of their own private assistance to make sure that whatever help comes into St. Kitts and Nevis can come quickly, can come willingly, can come in a capacity that is the very best that we can receive at that point in time.
And what is your role in terms of, foreigners that are living here in the Federation? For example, we have a number of maybe people who are working here as foreigners or students who are studying here.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have, in fact, not only, well, through our missions, first of all, there are persons who live here who are from countries that we consider to be allies of St. Kitts and Nevis. And so we serve as a conduit, as a sort of liaison between St. Kitts and Nevis and those countries in the event that we have a disaster, and those countries are interested in what is happening with their people in St. Kitts and Nevis. We try our best to communicate with those countries. If those countries are, I don't want to say critical, but if those countries are overly concerned as to what is happening with their people, we try to be the first, as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to assure them that their people are okay and that their people will, in fact, we have a very warm practice in St. Kitts and Nevis of treating people, guests, people coming in from overseas, people who live here but were born overseas. We have a knack for treating them like our own, especially in times of disaster, in times of when there's a need for assistance. You know, St. Kitts and Nevis people, we argue a lot, we fight a lot, but when it comes to a disaster, there's no time like that we see our people coming together. And as long as you're here, as long as you are here, we don't care if you're Kittitian, Nevisian, or wherever you're from, as long as you're here, if you're in need of help, especially in times of crisis, St. Kitts and Nevis, we always rise to the occasion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mr. Lloyd. Now, Dr. Brown, whenever there is a disaster, the impact of a disaster, the environment suffers. And there is environmental degradation, environmental damage that takes place because of natural disasters. Now, what is your subcommittee doing in terms of developing strategies and plans to protect the environment during disasters? Because that seems to me to be extremely important, developing sort of strategies and plans in how you can protect the environment if you have an impact.
Now, when it comes to a natural disaster, first I would say we as a people, we are responsible for our level of preparedness to face these. Within that each one of us as individuals have the responsibility also to make sure that we ourselves are also prepared. The first part is to be informed. And so therefore, coming on programs like this is part of that strategy, so as to inform persons, the community, that we are to be at a state of readiness, mentally, first and foremost. Mentally, we got to be prepared. And from that mental preparedness, we go into the physical preparedness, putting things in place. So from the community, we inform persons, and we tend to let persons know what are the potential threats that are around. For instance, you'll hear me speak a lot about waste management, the dumping of refuge everywhere. It's something that is growing, and it is a great concern when we talk about disasters. Because when we leave our waste of all sorts lying around in areas that we think, okay, nobody see me dump it, it's hidden somewhere. We're not only talking about hurricanes, when hurricane hits us, but we're seeing a lot of bushfires at times. And bushfires, because you have these flammable items lying around in the bushes, they act as fuel. But not only that, another concern that I see that we should be concerned about is that once these materials start burning, they are made out of chemicals. And when you think that is just smoke that is coming to you, this smoke may be filled with gases, gases that is toxic to humans animals, livestock. And you find that if we were to stop this dumping and take and control our waste properly, take it to the landfill, where it ought to be, where it could be properly be disposed of, we could avoid these disasters. There's something that I want to touch on, and it comes to hurricane. We tend to be quite insensitive when it comes to a tropical storm. When the tropical storm is threatening us, we go about as if, well, no, man, that's just a light breeze. But the danger of a tropical storm is not the wind. It's the torrential rainfall that's associated with it. And we have to be mindful that the type of soil we have is mainly a sandy or sandy loam, which is easily washed away. It's easily removed. So many times when we have to be mindful of what we do. They want the indiscriminate removal of vegetation, especially trees that would help to hold the soil. Person like to see from here, miles away from where they're at. But we got to be mindful that these also help in fighting these natural disasters. One of the things that I'm seeing that is growing, and I'm going to touch here on the construction industry, is when persons are building their homes, persons tend nowadays like to excavate their land. And we want to build a basement. No, nothing wrong with that. But we have to be mindful of the way we go about doing it. And many persons that decide, call in a backhoe and excavate because it's on my land. We don't seek the assistance of no kind of engineer or even building authorities and those. We just dig down and we build. But what we need to understand is that here in Sink, just about anywhere you go, the land has a slope. And once you disturb that slope, that terrain, by excavating especially, you have created a sort of a weak point. If we talk about geology, a sort of weak point. Now, when we have torrential rains, and that water soaks into that soil tends to move in the direction of the slope. And so therefore it exerts a pressure, especially a downhill pressure. So when you excavate, you allow a certain face to be exposed. Now, I'm going to call to attention a certain area. Bear in mind, in the Keon area, there's a road that runs from Upper Keon by the Sandbach Strait Waterworks and goes towards Windsor University. If you look at that road, you will find the mountain side of that road, traditionally, historically, is a hill. And now persons have gotten land on the hillside. And what you find is that there's this phenomenon that there are persons who have built already on the hill and left the hill intact. But there are others who have dug down the hillside because they want to make that road the front. In truth and in fact, the front should be the road that runs parallel to that road on the mountainside. But they decide they want to have access to their property from the bottom road. So they have dug down. Now when you look at that, what you have created, a whole community that is behind them is on a slope that is sloping in that direction. What I'm getting at is this. All that digging down has created weak points. And so when somebody is going to come and going to put down, there's a big difference in putting down a house, which is like the size of what we call a low-income house, than somebody who's going to put down a two-story apartment building. And we see that happening. What happened is that the weight, putting tons of concrete on soil, it displaces. Physics tells you that. It displaces its weight. But when there's an avenue that allows this soil under there, that foundation, to displace soil, especially when that soil is wet, it displaces towards the weakest point. And I see people who say, oh, they put down a retaining wall. All walls are not retaining. And what I'm seeing people in just, they put in on a fence. They put down a wall. In some other areas, I've seen persons, the wall is actually their house because it's jammed against that excavation. What you find is that the pressure that is on that, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Persons need, what I'm appealing to persons, you when you're doing this kind of work, get the proper guidance when you're doing this. Because if you're going to put down a $500,000 investment only to have one event to occur, and that event cause you to lose all of that. Not only that, be mindful of your neighbors as well. I would call to mind an incident that happened over Frigate Bay. We know that house that slipped down. If you were to look at that house, you would notice that the house was well built because it went down entirely. The house itself was well built. But the foundation, the area under it, there was an issue. Whatever the issue was, I'm not going to get into that. But the direction of movement, you would notice that there was nothing behind it to actually stop that movement. So persons, when you are building, remember disaster. Build to protect you and the surroundings. Another thing, look at your drain work. Make sure the drains around you are maintained. Nothing wrong if you're going to go and take some and clean out some guinea grass from the drain. We like to say, they have it down there, nobody even come clean it. It's your community, it's your responsibility. Protect yourself and your property. Keep those waterways, the gutterings around your house, those on the roof and those around your property. Keep them clear. Keep the where water is supposed to run, keep it clear, let the water run. Also, remember when we talk about disaster, I'm not just, keep in mind, we're not just talking about hurricane. Keep also that area, especially if there's a lot around you that is overgrown, the person ain't ready to build yet. Keep a little fire break around it as well. Keep debris from accumulating around it. When you see somebody just storing things on the lot and it's just loose, say something. Say something. Because in a hurricane, these could become missiles. If there's a fire, these could cause problems and affect you and everybody else. I'm calling for folks to be conscious of their surrounding. Sand mining. Something I'm seeing is that person believe because their property is theirs, they can just go and excavate the sand and move it. I want to make it clear today, according to the Minerals Act, all minerals, whether it's diamond, gold, or sand, is property of the state. And you need permission to remove it. Right? Some people I see selling sand from out the yard. The logic behind it is this. Why, you might say, well, why in my yard or in my sand? Yeah, but when you're doing that, you're excavating, you're binding. We also have to come and assess that that material is safe to move, because you're not putting other property and your property in jeopardy as well, right? It's all right to move it and put it back. But when you're taking it off-site, you need permission for that. Doing any kind of excavation, you need to have somebody come in and do the assessment so that you can be properly informed as how to go about doing it. Because you may be looking at your property, but we look at the bigger picture. We look at the whole community. Go back to the same Keon. Now, if there's an event of slippage of soil on that area, because the community above the road that I'm speaking about is considerably higher than the road itself. If there's slippage and dirt start coming down, torrential rain, and the soil becomes saturated, and slippage happens at that brink, don't think it's going to just affect them. It's going to affect those that are behind. To what extent, we do not know. So therefore, we got to safeguard ourselves and be mindful of these things. What I do affect everybody else. It's a chain reaction. We must be mindful of that. Disaster preparedness is individual preparedness, is a community preparedness.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. You touched on a number of areas there, and how important it is to develop environmental awareness. Having some knowledge of your environment helps us in preparing for disasters. So, for example, we know that we live along the coast. We know the possibilities of a hurricane. We know that we are in more danger than somebody who doesn't live along the coast. And so therefore, we do not have to place ourselves in a situation that makes us more vulnerable to disasters. And I think you mentioned a number of things there in terms of how people build. Bearing in mind the environment in which they live and how that can help to mitigate against the impact of disasters. How important it is to prepare, and that my individual action can have consequences for others, and how important it is to have that, the collective response and the people coming together and building stronger communities in terms of the infrastructure to mitigate against the detrimental impacts of hurricanes. So that basically is pre-disaster. I will come back to you.
Yep.
Now, Mr. Lloyd, because Foreign Affairs, we have one Foreign Affairs here, but the ministry does not operate solo. Your success or your failure has to do with your relationships and how you coordinate with others. Of course, because we live in the Caribbean and we're close to Latin America and so on, we know that a lot of the hazards that we face are faced in common. They are very, very similar. And because they are so similar, we know that our response has to be collective. A collective response to these common threats and these common disasters. Now, what are some of the international agencies, donor countries, NGOs that the ministry has a relationship with?
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs we've managed to forge several beautiful partnerships with a number of, practically all of our allies. Let me single out before I go any further, Taiwan's extremely efficient response to anytime there's a threat on St. Kitts and Nevis, be it hurricane, be it, Taiwan was asking when the volcano was giving trouble in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Taiwan was asking, what is the possibility? What would we do if by chain of causation something were to happen concerning our own Mount Limega here? And even at that point, they gave their commitment that they were ready to stand with St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of any assistance we might need. We have a very good relationship with AICA. We have a very good relationship with the Canadian government, the government of the United States of America. And so there are a number of places, even Mexico and some of the Latin American countries, they stand ready. You know, it's amazing. There are countries who, even if they themselves face the possibility of being impacted at the time when we are impacted by a natural disaster, they still stand ready to offer whatever assistance they can. Like I said, what we have been doing is making sure that our contacts within the disaster arena or disaster assistance arena of the United States, of Canada, of the European Union and so on, we make sure that the names and faces and the contacts that we associate with us getting assistance in times of a disaster, that they are intact. So far for the year, we've updated those contacts or made sure that those contacts are intact like 4 times. And again, when we were threatened recently with this storm, the impending storm, again, the subcommittee met under the leadership of the permanent secretary, Ms. Kebas, and we went over a number of things. We went through all of the contacts, all of the telephone numbers, all of the other kinds of contacts. If this goes down as a contact, how do we proceed? What's the backup plan to if we are trying to get this agency and there's no response? What do we use as a plan B, and so on? So we have in fact been going over and over. Some people might call it redundancy, but we've been going over and over and over those contacts just to make sure that in the event of a disaster, they are right there. Our reach to them is right there. Again, I cannot stress enough that many times when we are impacted as a country, there are other countries in the region that are impacted by similar or same natural disaster at the same time. And so we depend very, very heavily on the damage assessment team to bring in the initial assessment, bring in the initial report, so that we can get working in knowing what are our immediate needs. I must say here that this is an opportunity to say to persons in the community that when there's a natural disaster, immediately after the disaster, we're not saying go outside before you get the all clear, but what we are saying is that if you have damage, property damage especially, and so on, there are particular needs for water, other things, you need to say as soon as you can get in contact with someone from any member of the damage assessment team. It doesn't even have to be government. It can be Red Cross. It can be another NGO that's assisting with damage assessment. Say what you see that have gone wrong, that has been affected early, so that the report can be in. As soon as the report is in, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is ready and willing to jump on the asking wagon, the wagon of asking our partners for help for the immediate articles that we need.
Yes. I know that the Caribbean has, in terms of the coordinating disasters and so on, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. What is the relationship of Foreign Affairs with that agency?
We have absolutely no problems communicating with the regional agencies with respect to disaster. But in the case of the one you just mentioned, they have a very, very close-knit relationship with NEMA. And so since NEMA is pretty much the nucleus or the center of operation, if they can communicate with NEMA more quickly, perhaps more efficiently than they can with Foreign Affairs, immediately post-disaster, we allow them to communicate with NEMA, and NEMA, the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee has a representative who will be on the NEOC anyway. So they communicate directly with NEMA, and the NEMA in turn will be able to give instructions or advice to the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee as to information that they have received, offers for assistance that they have received, and so we wouldn't be duplicating to begin with. And secondly, we would be in a position to assess who has already committed to assistance to us, and knowing that if this part is taken care of, then Foreign Affairs Assistance Subcommittee, the Disaster Assistance Subcommittee, can focus on another area.
And you have a relationship as well with USAID?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. A very good relationship, in fact. Sometimes even before, I think it's okay to say sometimes even before we are able to contact them concerning an impending disaster, we get the emails, we get the communication correspondence from them. We see that there is an impending storm coming your way, you know, and we just want to remind you that we stand committed. In the event of anything, we stand committed to quickly and efficiently assisting St. Kitts and Nevis in whatever way we can. So sometimes we don't even get the chance to reach out. Even before we reach out, some reach out to us to remind us that they stand ready to assist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what is the importance given to diplomatic and consular missions, and the importance of communicating to donor countries from policies on the acceptance of unsolicited or inappropriate supplies?
I want to say that St. Kitts and Nevis, I hope the community on a whole understands that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and by extension, well, the Disaster Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, is the primary agency that is authorized to seek assistance on behalf of the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis in times of disaster. The St. Kitts and Nevis Red Cross Society, they have their partners, the other Red Cross societies and so on, regionally and internationally, and we welcome the non-governmental organizations and what assistance they can garner from their agencies, their non-governmental agencies, internationally, regionally, and so on. But with respect to individuals, companies, entities wishing to whether assist or seek assistance, we must make it clear that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the agency primarily tasked with the responsibility of seeking official assistance on behalf of the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis in times of a disaster. That is why we stick close to our missions, our heads of missions, the staff at our missions, to make sure that they stick close to Kittitians and Nevisians in their part of the diaspora. Because our missions, if they come across persons or entities willing to assist in times of disaster, our missions will first report that information back to Capital, what we call Capital, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so the ministry, in that case, would be in a position to report to the National Emergency Management Agency that these are the entities that we know of within the diaspora, whether individually or collectively, who are willing to assist with respect to whatever our needs are. Well, primarily and almost emergently and immediately after a disaster. These are the persons, the entities willing to assist, and that information, you see, it's because we want to make sure that one, we are not duplicating, and two, that the information is clear. The information is clear. We must each know what the other is doing. Because if someone says they're asking for something from a company in the United States on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis after a disaster, who knows if our mission in Washington has not already been in contact with the corporate sector of that same company. And so to avoid embarrassment, to avoid duplication, to make sure that things even though it's after a disaster, seem smooth. Our communication, the correspondence is smooth and seamless. We urge people to understand that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is primarily the entity authorized to seek official assistance for St. Kitts and Nevis in times of disaster.
Right.
We welcome whatever the assistance, we welcome whatever assistance persons want to garner, put together, and forward. However, it must be done properly. And how to do that properly? You find the nearest embassy or consulate that is responsible to St. Kitts and Nevis, and they would transmit that information to us as to what is being offered, what is happening with respect to persons and offering assistance, so that the information can flow properly. We can't do anything in silo in the United States, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs certainly cannot act by itself outside of informing and advising the National Emergency Management Agency that of the situation.
Yes, and sometimes, even though it's a disaster and there is need for disaster relief, which the humanitarian aid helps with the disaster relief, the donors and people who want to donate, even though the intention is good, sometimes there can be ulterior motives behind basically giving, and sometimes to who is doing the giving, because then you don't really want the country's reputation to be tarnished.
Absolutely.
And additionally too is that you want to make sure that what is given is really what is needed.
Yes, very much so, because I can speak about the St. Kitts Nevis Red Cross Society for a little bit. The St. Kitts Nevis Red Cross Society, after disaster, even in their efforts to assist, they don't just go out giving out packages and so on. They try to understand what the particular needs of the family, the individual, the community that they're living with are. Because it makes no sense to give out pots and pans to a family who is going to die of thirst in the next 12 hours. And it makes no sense to give out food to a family who may more immediately be in need of clothes and blankets and that kind of thing, and so on. And so we have to be it has to be a very coordinated approach. It has to be a very coordinated approach. I think the backbone of why the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee operates the way it operates is to ensure that there is proper accountability for anything that St. Kitts and Nevis receives as assistance. If 1,000 blankets were donated by USAID after disaster, the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee would like to be in a position, along with NEMA, to be able to account for 1,000 blankets, even if the 1,000 blankets have been in fact distributed to the community. We would like to be in a position, along with the rest of government, to properly account for what assistance was received.
You've made an extremely good point, because whenever you have disasters of great magnitudes, people are willing to help, but sometimes the aid never gets to the people, or it only gets to a few people. And you wonder, where did it go? Where did it disappear? And it brings the whole question in terms of the management of the humanitarian aid, because sometimes that aid is misappropriated. As you correctly said, you might receive so many blankets, but the blankets can't be accounted for. And whenever you have that sort of, it is really disturbing, really, that when you have a disaster and there are people suffering and in need, that the aid that was given to help to alleviate that suffering and to bring relief to those persons suffering, that aid never reaches them, they never benefit from it, and that there are unscrupulous people who are pocketing the aid, misappropriating it, and that sort of a thing. It is rather unfortunate. And it happens, and we've seen it happen. We've seen it in the case of Haiti and other places. Now, sure, go ahead.
Just before you go, sorry.
I'm not speaking, if I could put it this way, I'm sure the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would not mind me saying to the general public, as long as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is involved in, say, the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, accounting for whatever aid or whatever assistance is received post-disaster. You see, because even after disaster, when things pan out and when things go back to normal, a very, very high sense of embarrassment can loom if persons cannot account for what the country has been given in terms of aid and assistance after disaster. Everybody is trying to get back to normal. Everybody is in a fluster as to who gets what, and I didn't get any blanket, I didn't get any tarpaulin, etc. But I can say, I think the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will not mind me saying that as long as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is involved in accounting for any relief or aid or assistance that this country receives post-disaster, it is going to be thoroughly, every effort is going to be made to make sure that it is thoroughly and calculatedly accounted for.
Yes. Now, Dr. Brown, we spoke about the importance of people preparing so that the environmental impact can be lessened. Now, in terms of an impact, what can be put in place, or what is designed as an environmental response in terms of disasters? Because, of course, you know, you can have ecologies and habitats that are impacted and affected, and there has to be certain plans put in place for the recovery of those ecologies and habitats. But of course, you know, you have to do a proper assessment of the environmental damage that would have taken place. But there would have to be a response to that environmental damage and to see how best that there can be some sort of a recovery done to the environment.
Now, when it comes to the response depends firstly on your level of preparedness. And in doing that, part of the strategy is, like I said before, to be informed. And for us to be informed means we have a monitoring system that we have in place pre-disaster, where we constantly monitor areas that we deem could be possible problematic, could be heavily impacted. We monitor the coastline, the forested areas, the guts. We monitor areas in and around communities, looking at for, like I said, the dumping of refuge, sand mining, deforestation. We look at these areas, even looking to see where the vegetation is overgrown and where it needs to be addressed. So it's before we have these in place, but also we also have a mechanism in place where we have ensured that personnel are also in place and they are properly informed as to what their role will be in the event that there is a disaster. So that after the disaster, we can respond quickly and effectively because the personnel has already been informed and persons know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do. So when they're called upon, there is no fidgeting as to figure out who going where, who doing what. For instance, we have the rangers, and the rangers, they're constantly monitoring. They're monitoring and they're reporting back all the time. So we know exactly, listen, hurricane pass, we know exactly where we got to go to and look first. Where is priority? We also have to listen to what the public is saying. This is the place to be affected. We also have to work together with other committees where every one of them have their area of expertise.
Yes.
And so we have to tap into these different expertise. Take, for instance, shelter. Shelter has to do with persons and making sure that persons' lives are preserved. Where does environment come into play with shelter? Of course. Because if after a disaster, and let's say there's a landslide, we now have to go in with our expertise and inform shelter. Listen, that housing there, that dwelling that you had there, that you propose for a shelter, it has been compromised. Why it is compromised? Because there's a landslide or some slippage that is close by and could, with the constant rain after, it could impact it. So we have to work together, create these synergies, but these are created before, so that when post-service, when we activate the mechanism, search and rescue, distribution of also personnel. So one agency may not have the manpower that it needs. So we have to move around persons from one agency to another to assess, you know. So that is when also it comes back to training. So we train persons in different areas, in different aspects, because you may never know which team you may end up on, right? You may be working as a ranger today, but after a hurricane, you may end up working along with the firemen, the defense force, shelter, you know. So this is where you find that the which is being proactive, is quite important because it determines how effective your response is going to be. In the response, we get out as quick as possible. There are cases where I've been out even before the all clear is given to make assessment. Especially you're listening to the radio and you hear somebody send out something, a call. Even during that disaster, sometimes you also have to risk yourselves as well and go out there and lend assistance, you know, so as to lessen the impact of So when it comes to the environment, it's a constant work, but it is a collaborative effort.
Yes.
We cannot afford to work in isolation. That is why, you know, one would work out, why is it you have environment on your program today, but you still have foreign? The two of them doesn't seem to go together. But actually, it's a system. It's connected. There's a relationship in all of it. So, right? So, I have to know what they are about. They have to know what we are about. Fire and rescue has to know. Shelter also has to know. And we all have to be on the same page. Not just in the same book,
yes,
but on the same page. And this is one thing we cannot say, that is he work and this is me work. It's all of us working together. Working. What do you say the program is? Working for you? But if I'm working for you, but at the same time, it's all of us,
yes,
working together.
Right. And of course, the legislation with respect to the environment to help with disaster risk management is very, very important. And a committee, a subcommittee, like the Environment Subcommittee. I know there's a Department of Environment. You spoke earlier in terms of people throwing things in guts, and it's creating disaster as well, because when the guts are clogged and the drains are clogged, you can have flooding.
Right.
So we need to have legislation in place that deals with that sort of a thing, for people dumping indiscriminately and illegally in guts and so on, to prevent that sort of a behavior that impacts the environment and creates disaster.
When it comes to the dumping, is really a real concern. It's a real concern. A person must understand. I went in the mountainside, and this is where a lot of the dumping happens. Go in the mountainside. And I went to show a colleague a walking route, and I took him to a bridge, and took him there to challenge him, to show him that he was actually walking on the bridge, but he didn't even realize that. And the bridge was built in 1940. That's how long it is there. But here's what the interesting thing is. When I got under the bridge, is what was there. A whole house. Furniture. Living room set. Beds. Cupboards. Right there. Persons go up there and dump it there. The question I like to ask, when you dump these things up in the mountain, where do you think they're going to end up? Right back down. But in there have rocks. And when these get caught up in these rocks and the water comes down, where will the water go? Water tends to find the easiest part. And the easiest part is to go around them and hit the hillsides. Whenever you see a gut running and you see that muddy water comes down, I don't know about you, but for me, it's a concern. Because it means the water is taking down silt and all that should not be. So all of these debris coming down and all it, but if that blockage happens close to residential areas, we look at the images we saw in Japan the other day, where you just see a hillside just coming down. And we say, boy, look at that in Japan. The situation is building up right in our backyard. We got to be mindful of that. And so I'm appealing to folks to stop. Another thing I want to stress on. Personally, the squatters, people going to build. People building in guts. Right? And there are legislation against that.
We are going to continue, but I want to open the phone lines. The numbers to call are 466-2666, 466-2666. The cell numbers are 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the international number is 1-239-645-1500. That is 1-239-645-1500. We welcome your calls. Yes, Dr. Brown.
No, I was saying, persons are even constructing dwellings in guts. Persons using gut sites for farming, you got to be careful. When I approach persons, a common thing I'm hearing, man, it's a long time, they got to run for years. You run for years. But one day, while you're inside that dwelling, that gut decides to run. I want persons to realize it's not rainfall that occurs on the lower slopes in around our communities that causes these guts to run. It's rainfall that's occurring in the mountain. And rain could be falling in the mountain for days, and you don't even notice it. That is what causes, as we said, gut come down. That is what causes the torrential rain that's happening up there. Take, for instance, in Bastille, persons parking in the guts and everything there. Ain't no rain that's falling in Bastille area that causes those guts to run. It's rain falling in the mountain that causes that volume of water to come down. Same thing happens around the island. And it's a long time I haven't seen these guts around the island really run like that. But if it happened before, it can happen again. They are guts there for a reason. Water make them. So, persons, be mindful. If you got land, even legally, make an assessment of that land. Constant assessment to ensure that your land is not being compromised. Look at the activities that is happening around it and ensure your land is not compromised. And when you're going to build, put measures in place to safeguard your property and the properties around. For those doing farming, it's not every type of farming that goes any and any way. We in the Department of Environment, we are responsible for God, because God says what in the legislation is what is considered areas of special concern. Meaning it's a type of protection. You need permission to do that farming. There's certain type of farming, that's why fruit trees and those, and depending on the slope and everything, I may tell you, don't touch it. At the other post, I may tell you, okay, it's okay because it's a bit distant from the waterway itself, and the slope is enough to do certain type of farming. So, persons get permission before you go in, right? Don't wait for me to come and tell you move and then you start to cuss. Your cussing ain't going to do me nothing, right? Because I look at the bigger picture. There's a community downstream that needs to be protected. Also, got to protect you as well. When it comes to us, also one thing I want to tell us about the committee is the assessment that we make is alternative routes. So that in a case of a disaster, hurricane, anything like that, if the main road becomes blocked, we look at alternative routes. But I must appeal to folks. These alternative routes are not meant for regular traffic. So you have to pay attention to persons directing the traffic. I'm going to name one famous part, that's Keon. I'm living in the Keon, And whenever something is blocked, there are some routes that persons will take. And there's one in particular that takes you from Spooners, and you could go right out of Keon. But what happened is that persons who normally don't even know the route, there's one particular area that is a bottleneck. So it doesn't take two-way traffic. And persons tend to be going up without even, you try to direct them in certain directions. They don't want to go there, they don't want to go there. The alternative routes, but you have to pay attention to persons directing you. Pay attention to instructions. Whenever there's a disaster, if a post-disaster, everything is chaos. Everything is out of place. It is not a normal situation, so don't expect normal conditions. You may be directed in areas that you're not familiar with. That areas that you don't normally go. It's not normal. So follow the instructions given, the directions given. Be disciplined. That is what we call it for. Be disciplined, especially after disaster. Stay calm. We tell people stay calm. We are aware that it is difficult to stay calm, but exercise some sort of control. Tempers flare and here and there. Remember the persons who are directing you. They're risking their life. I'd rather be home. I got to, my roof probably blow off too, but I got to be out here. I have children also to look after. I'd rather be there, but I am here. So let us work together so that we can move forward as quickly and efficiently as possible. Working for you, working together.
Yes, the disasters, of course, we are developing countries. We do not have a lot of money in reserves and so on for disasters. And every time there is an impact from a disaster, it sets our countries back in terms of their development, when hurricanes impact us, earthquakes, whatever the case is, as developing countries, our development is severely affected. And it's almost like we have to start all over again. We do not have large reserves like the United States of America and Canada, that when they have these disasters, they can speak about their activating this fund and that fund to deal with their disasters, FEMA and all kinds of things. And so we have to depend on assistance from outside. And that assistance, as Mr. Lloyd explained, in the first instance is really immediate, but it can be long-term as well.
That is why we, in the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, we not only stay in contact with our partners for assistance in the hurricane season, inside the hurricane season, out of the hurricane season, we are in contact with them. Because as you said, after post-disaster, the assistance required is immediate. Mm-hmm. But then, if 10 out of the 12 schools on the island have been destroyed, then in the long term, we would need to keep in contact with those donor agencies, with those agencies who are willing to assist us both in the short term and the long term.
And the medium term.
And the medium term, to get not only persons, families, communities back on their feet in the immediate, but in the medium and the long term, help us visualize where we are going, what we are going to do, what are the things we are going to need to get back on track with respect to some of the entities and the systems and the regular programming, if I could call it that, that has been impacted, and see where we go from there. Yes, because there's a very huge difference between asking for 100 cases of water or 1,000 blankets and assistance to helping to rebuild a school, a primary school or a secondary school, very, very important in a particular community, without which the education of that community will definitely suffer in the long term. Mm-hmm. So we keep close to them. We keep close to our partners. We keep close to our donor agencies. We keep close to persons, entities, whether it be individually or collectively in the diaspora who are willing to assist. There are some individuals who may actually be willing to assist with a number of books and clothes and articles for school. They may not be able to give blocks or cement or pay for consultancy or the actual construction of the entity, but they may be in a position to mobilize their friends, their families, and so on out in the diaspora to give a box of books, a box of crayons, a box of library books, about, school uniforms and so on, to bring not only to bring the community back to a state of normalcy in the immediate, but in the medium and the long term, to make sure that the system can come back together in such a way as to not impact over the long term, or not have the community over the long term suffering as a result of this disaster that happened a year and a half ago.
Right, and it's important that when these disasters impact us, and impact us severely, it is important that the outside world knows.
Yes.
Communication becomes extremely important. You want to communicate what is happening on the ground. You do not want to hide it. You do not want to exaggerate it. you want to report it exactly as it is. Because sometimes what happens, is that you have a disaster, and of course, what is reported outside is not exactly what is happening on the ground.
Exactly. And that is why, again,
if I may take the opportunity to say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the official entity to seek assistance on behalf of the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis. People tend in disaster to exaggerate. Yeah. Lord, I'm sure most of them down there dead. Everybody roof gone. They've seen a few roofs that have been lifted, yes, but everybody roof gone. And because of the internet and social media, the World Wide Web, we have to be very careful in how we communicate. If we say to a donor agency or a partner agency willing to assist us, we are seeking X number of articles and so on to get persons back on their feet in the immediate, and somebody puts on social media totally different scenario, totally different account of what they think they observe in the community, then the agency, the partner agency trying to assist us is going to wonder, well, what is really happening in St. Kitts and Nevis? Here's an interview, or here's a commentary on somebody's social media saying the situation is much worse than the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the government of St. Kitts and Nevis is putting out that it is. And on the flip side, the situation, well, I thought the government, the Foreign Assistance Committee reported that they were in need of X number of articles. Well, based on this commentary, based on this contribution from this individual or these individuals in the community on their social media pages, things are not as bad as the government in St. Kitts and Nevis is saying that it is. Maybe they really don't need 1,000 blankets. Maybe they really don't need X number of pieces or articles of clothes, as they are saying. This person is saying it's not so bad. Maybe for that person and their family, it may not be so bad. But then they live 2 or 3 miles away from a community that has been severely impacted, more severely than they know of. And so when all the information from the assessment team comes back to a central point, which is the National Emergency Management Agency, then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee is in a better position to give a comprehensive picture of what is happening in the island, in the country, in the Federation, as opposed to 1 or 2 persons telling, whether exaggeratively or subjectively, what they observed and they think to be the situation in the entire picture.
Right, so the over-reporting of the damages can be a problem, and also the under-reporting.
Yes.
The under-reporting can also be a problem, because remember that whatever aid that you would require must somehow be proportionate to the needs that are there in terms of what the people have.
Yes.
So if you under-report, you're not going to get enough to help the situation.
And we don't get enough, you know what's the first thing that's going to happen? Persons in the communities, especially those severely impacted, they're going to start to compare and contrast. Well, as far as I know, Connery was not hit as hard as Challengers, and everybody in Connery seems to have gotten a package, a relief package, toiletries, this and that and so on. And nobody seems to be looking at Challengers, nobody seems to be realizing that Challengers was hit equally as hard or more severely. So individuals ought to refrain from giving social media, I'm sure, the impression post-disaster that the way they see it is the comprehensive picture. They ought to allow the persons, the entities authorized to do the reporting, to seek the assistance, to be the entity that reports to the nation through the National Emergency Agency what the comprehensive picture is, and to be the agency to be talking to the, officially talking to the donors and the assistance personnel outside.
I can't recall whether it was Irma or Maria. Though in recent times, those are the two that we really remember. And I remember that NEMA did a report in terms of the number of persons who suffered damages to their roof and who needed their roof repaired. And there was a program to assist with roof repair. But then you had all kinds of people coming out of the woodwork and saying that their roof was damaged too. But anyway. Yes, doctor.
In terms, let me come in here, in terms of local scene, when it comes to communication, I too would like to join in and say to the general public, post-disaster, or even during the disaster, please be mindful of the type of commentary and message that you give out. Because we also get a lot of our information, our main source is the community. And there are many persons who give second-hand and third-hand report. But we know as it goes from hand to hand, the report changes. Right? Telling people, refrain from this because it creates more panic and chaos and more confusion. And so we have to be deciphering, because remember, we have to prioritize. So you're going to tell me, oh, down here in Newtown, all the roof them blow off. That's what I expect everybody to in Newtown to be running up and down the place. Whereas I could be rushing to Newtown, but not realizing my neighbor next to me is actually hurt and actually needs immediate attention. But because of somebody calling me and giving me this graphic, imagery, therefore my priority changes based on that report, not really giving me the opportunity to make a proper assessment as to where to actually the assistance is urgently needed. Persons, I will tell you, charge your cell phones and those kind of things. If you have radios for communication, make sure they're up and working. But please, use proper discretion when relating information. Your information is key, but you also got to be mindful of what you're relating to give a proper assessment to persons. Yes. So that we can properly assess and respond appropriately. That is quite key. And I'm appealing to folks, watch what you say, watch what you write.
These donor agencies, they work through official channels.
And they listen to it.
And they listen as well.
Yes.
So, they want to know, before they can give aid, they want to know that they have some sort of an assessment from some official body, some official authority, before they actually can give aid. And they want to know specifically what is it that I can give. You should, the list in terms of humanitarian aid, I meant to ask you that, Kervin, should come from where? That official list, in terms of the aid.
Should actually, through the National Emergency Agency, come from you're talking about locally in terms of the assessment?
Yes, because you don't want people giving things that are really not needed. If you're going to be attending to the needs of people impacted by a disaster, then that list in terms of what should be donated to help the people, where should it come from?
It should come from, that list should come from the persons, the committee, the subcommittee, doing the initial assessment of damage and needs within the community. It makes no sense, again, to provide clothes to persons who are going to be hungry for the next week. It makes no sense to provide in the immediate food for persons who have managed to, their roof might be gone, but they have managed to stock up on canned goods in preparation for the storm. Those resources could go elsewhere.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the list, the immediate list of the needs individually, as families, as communities, come from the people, the subcommittee, who immediately after the disaster go in and do the assessment as to who has been injured physically, what property has been damaged, and what the needs are of the individuals in the different areas. When that list comes in, the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee has a pretty good idea that it's raining a lot. What we actually need are more tarpaulins than clothes, or the water system has been compromised, and what we need more immediately, right now, is potable drinking water. Houses, structures have been destroyed. A lot of persons have had to be placed in shelters. The immediate needs of those persons in the shelters are toiletries, personal items. Okay? After a disaster, I think that individuals, it doesn't take a lot to make an individual nominally or fairly comfortable, you know. As long as post-disaster, persons, whether in shelters or in their own homes, can return to a level of comfort that gives them the hope that tomorrow is going to be better than what today is.
Now, disasters significantly impact our tourism industry and our tourism product. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs may have the duty to issue things like travel advisories and things like that.
Yes. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, well, a little bit different to the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself would help with things like tracing. If you're in St. Thomas and you want to know, to make sure that your family in St. Kitts and Nevis, they are okay, and so on. Those things the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can try to assist with in terms of tracing, make sure that we report, we answer inquiries of, I heard that the village of Deep Bay was hard hit. I have all my folks and my children and so on living in Deep Bay. I want to know about them. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs can try to facilitate through, of course, the National Emergency Management Agency with those kinds of tracing. Issue of travel advisories and so on. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as does the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, would be guided by the issuance of a report, the issuance of advice, the issuance of direction from the National Emergency Management Agency to say, all the reports have come in from the different areas, and the National Emergency Management Agency has concluded that up to this point, this is the state that the country is in. The country is now back to a place where we can begin to re-accept tourists. The state of the country is such that we, in as much as we would love for tourists to start coming back quickly, we might not, Brimstone Hill might have been damaged so bad that we are not quite ready to accept tourists back at that UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Now, the composition of the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, I'll just read the composition. The director, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is the chairperson, is the permanent secretary, the cabinet secretary, the Director General of the St. Kitts and Nevis Red Cross, a representative from the Ministry of Finance, Developing and Planning, and we can understand why, the Ministry of Tourism, a representative from the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, a representative from the OAS, the Organization of American States, a representative from AICA, a representative from NEMA, an ex officio member, and a representative from Nevis. So that is the committee, the coordinating committee,
Yes.
the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, which shows how important. And then, Dr. Brown, your committee is the composition of that committee. You have the Director of Environment, who is the chair. Department, a representative from, well, they have here oil companies, Texaco, Delta, and Shell, but we don't have Texaco here. And we don't have Shell here.
Shell.
What
So
is the one? We have Delta Petroleum.
I'm Sol.
And we have Sol.
Yes.
The St. Kitts and Nevis Heritage Society, you can understand why. St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force, the Coast Guard, the Forestry Division, Sustainable Development, St. Kitts and Nevis Fire and Rescue, Parks and Beaches, the Ministry of Marine Resources, Maritime Division, the Solid Waste Management, you touched a lot on the thing, Public Health,
Yes.
and a representative from NEMA, an ex officio member, and a representative from Nevis. So these subcommittees are comprised of persons who are capable and competent in certain areas to be able to assist whenever a disaster impacts us.
You see there that there are certain entities that doesn't seem to fit in the framework of what persons normally think, like the petroleum companies. But remember, a disaster is not just a natural disaster. It could be a fire, right? It could be anything that is widespread.
That is correct.
Right? Any event, right? Man-made or natural, right? So we are trying to be prepared in the event of any disaster, no matter what the characteristic is.
No, we are out of time. We have to go. And I know that the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, for example, if there's a health disaster, you would work along with the Ministry of Health.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Because some of the assistance may need to come from overseas.
Yes, for example, what we have now in terms of the COVID, and I noticed that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, working along with the Ministry of Health, whenever we received any sort of a donation from Taiwan, it was always the representatives from Foreign Affairs, the Minister from Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Health working together, because this is a public health disaster.
Right.
So we see the collaboration, and we have seen that there. Is there anything that you want to say before we go?
Well, just to assure the public in St. Kitts and Nevis, well, to make them aware first and foremost that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the official asking agency, if I could put it that way, in times of a disaster on behalf of St. Kitts and Nevis. We want to assure the public that we remain in close contact with our missions, the persons in our embassies and high commissions overseas, and by extension, the persons in the different areas of the diaspora around the world, to immediately access assistance on behalf of the public, on behalf of St. Kitts and Nevis, should we be impacted by a natural or other disaster. We want to assure the public that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stands ready and competent to liaise, to partner with international agencies to garner as much assistance as is possible in that time frame for and on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, should there be a disaster. A lot of people may not have known about the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, and so today part of the exercise today has been to make you aware that this subcommittee exists and to tell you what this subcommittee and the rest of the government is doing on your behalf with respect to not only the hurricane season, because in my opinion, outside of the hurricane season, we have several threats and vulnerabilities that we have all year round. Okay? So when it comes to asking outside entities for assistance, liaising, communicating with outside agencies on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, with or without a disaster, it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee working in collaboration with the National Emergency Management Agency.
Dr. Brown?
For people, folks, be prepared and be properly informed. Follow the official guidelines, official information that is going out. Be guided by that. Remember our personal responsibility in the collective effort to be resilient in the event of any disaster.
Thank you so much to both of you. Mr. Kervin Lloyd, who is the alternate on the Foreign Assistance Subcommittee, which is chaired by the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Kay Bass. I want to thank as well Dr. Eric Brown, who is the alternate on the Environment Subcommittee, which is chaired by Ms. June Hughes, who is the Director of the Department of Environment. Thank you very much for being a part of our program today. I want to thank all of you for joining us for our program today. Next week, we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, take good care. I am Lesroy Williams.